I know somebody's going to ask that, so if anybody comes in asking, you are hereby deputized to spread the word if you wish. And the other thing that you love to see is the downloads. So let me get that link out to you shortly. Welcome everybody for attending. It's been a couple weeks since I've done one of these. I was out in Europe. I was at the Global Excel Summit in London, and then I was just doing some personal traveling in Greece. So it was a really fun time. Glad to be back in the saddle, as it were, though. And let me share those downloads right now. So the downloads are in the chat now. All you're gonna need to do for that, and honestly, I see people still coming in, so like I'm gonna copy and paste it already. I'm gonna copy and paste it again. It's unfortunate that Teams doesn't have a way to like pin old chats, but anyway, you can download the downloads by clicking the link, and assuming you're on a PC, all you should be able to need to do is just head over to your downloads and extract it. Make sure you extract it, otherwise you might have some problems running some of the files. Okay, so I have the downloads. Just get that out of the way. Give me like a little thumbs up if you can. I just left it right as a reaction on the chat. Okay. I see great. I'm assuming that means a thumbs up. Okay, I see another thumbs up. I still see people coming in, so welcome to those of you filing in. The downloads are shared, and we are recording. Yeah, let me double check that. Okay, that would be that would be bad if I wasn't recording. People would get mad. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and dive in here. For those of you who don't know me, I think a lot of you have been to these. My name is George Mon. I'm an Excel trainer, Microsoft MVP, the author of a couple of books with O'Reilly Media. And I do these sessions. Oh, I'm from Cleveland. I joked at the Excel Summit that I come to London for the weather. It's pretty cold here. It's so cold that my side door lock froze and my garage door also wasn't working. So it's like so cold that machines are breaking. It's great. Anyway, I'm in Cleveland. I do data analytics training, and this is my opportunity to give back to the community and also just practice new things, new material. So it's kind of a win-win to do these sessions for those reasons. Today we're going to talk about group by pivot by. So these are some newer functions in Excel, and I'm hoping a lot of you have used pivot tables before. So you know how powerful they are, and they're drag and drop, and that has some pros and some cons, right? The pros is that they don't require a lot of technical knowledge. The cons are that they're harder to program, right? Because they're not code. So you can't, it's hard to set up a, user input code driven solution with pivot tables. They're kind of a drag and drop solution, and they're almost harder in a way. The idea is that they're supposed to be self-service, but that kind of raises the question, well, is my user smart enough to know how to even use the pivot table? Do I maybe even need to break this down further for them where, yes, there are formulas, but I'm kind of controlling those formulas? So it gives you as the programmer, the developer, the user, a little more control, and also maybe makes the experience a little easier for your user depending on what they're trying to do. So as you're going to see, these are some whoppers of functions. There are a lot of parameters. We're not going to cover all of them today. This is very much an introductory session. Okay, so I'm not going to show you everything that you can do with these, but I'm hoping that it gives you a good intuition for what these can do for you and how to think about them, particularly if you've used pivot tables before. So I see people still coming in. For those of you doing so, welcome. I'm just going to share those downloads one more time here. Okay, and we are recording. All right. So if there are any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to jump right into the material today. Again, ideally, you have been able to download those files. I'm going to jump into them right now. So you're going to see a few things here. These examples come right from my blog. So there is a resource file right here. If I open that, you're going to see that we are basically just going to be walking through a couple of old posts that I wrote. So if you want to see something in more depth later, you can head over there. Okay. And then the files are, we're going to do group by first. Okay. So you should just go to group by Excel demo. I still see people coming in, so I'm going to keep spamming you with the download link. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and start with this data set first. Okay. It's like a basic, customer orders kind of a data set. All right. And let me get myself set up here. Again, if there are any questions, the chat is the best place to do that. The microphone and cameras are turned off. Don't need any more Zoom bumps in my life. So that is the best way to communicate. Okay, and I do check it pretty frequently, so you can do that, communicate that way. All right, so I'm in this group by Excel demo. Okay, and again, if you want to follow along with me, I'm going to be walking through this post that I wrote on GroupBy. So the first thing before we even think about these functions, okay, we should understand what is a pivot table and what does it do for us and what are the benefits of it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and insert my data into a pivot table. I do have this data. Again, it's in this worksheet group by Excel demo. It's formatted as a table. So I'm going to go ahead and insert this as a pivot table. Let's bring this into a new worksheet. Okay, and this will serve as a good compare contrast. I think it's a really useful way to learn things, right, is to take something that you already know and then compare and contrast it to what you're trying to learn. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to take my category and I'm going to click that, and Excel's smart enough to know that, hey, this is a category. It should probably get placed on either the rows, the columns, or the values. The rows is generally the starting point. If you're not prompting Excel any further, it's pretty much going to assume that you want your data down the rows, or you want your category down the rows. Okay, so that's the first step, right? So we needed to pick a category, right? We're going to place that, in this case, place along the rows. Okay. And then our second step is going to be placing some kind of a value or measure. So if you've used Power BI before, like Tableau or any kind of BI, you've probably heard that idea of like dimensions versus measures. Up here, what we were really doing was, picking a dimension is another way to put that, or picking a category, lots of different ways to say the same thing. Now we're going to do is pick a measure or like a quantity, okay? And that gets placed in the values, okay? So those are the first two steps. And then the third step is almost like a sub-step of part two. So we can almost call this 2A, which is, pick your aggregation type. Okay, so by default, usually it's going to be a sum in Excel, or it could be, an average, or we could even get more exotic and get into like a standard deviation or something like that. But I think for the most of us, we probably just mainly go with sums, counts, and averages. Again, if I wanted to do that in Excel with a pivot table, let's come over to sum of sales, get that value field setting. So I double click there. Now this is not a pivot table class, so I'll try to go through anything that you missed quickly, but I think I have a class for pivot tables at some point. So anyway, this is our aggregation, right? So right now we're taking a sum of sales. We could change that to like an average, for example, or maybe we want the maximum sales, whatever we want, right? These are the ways that we're doing it. So we're pointing and clicking here, and I'll change it back to sum. Okay, and I could break this down even further if I wanted to. Maybe I'll break this down by customer age. Actually, that was a bad example because Excel thought that was a quantity. Let's do one that's more obviously categorical. I'm going to take product name, right? So I broke that down even further. So now we've got two different categories that we are breaking down sum of sales by. So that's how I like to think of this, right? We're taking this number, whatever this aggregated number is, and we're almost slicing it into, mini segments, mini slices of the pie. So this paradigm is going to be really useful for when we start with GroupBy, because that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to pick the dimension that's going to go along the rows. GroupBy is always going to group our data along the rows. Okay, when we want to get into something more like this, and okay, this is going to overwrite what's there, But, if we want a true pivot table where we've got data along the rows or categories along the rows and categories along the columns, that's what PivotBy is going to be for. But GroupBy is a little simpler to use. That's one of the major advantages. That's why we're starting with it, right? It just introduces less complexity. So it's a good place to start with. We're always going to place our values, our categories along the rows. We're going to pick a measure. We're going to specify how do we want that measure to be aggregated. There's a whole lot of other stuff that we can do here to customize, just like, if you go into Pivot Table and you come up here to Pivot Table Analyze or Design, lots of other configurations, right? Do you want subtotals? Do you want percentages? All that good stuff. But that's really the main like 3-part step here, okay, for what we're doing with GroupBy. So hopefully that mental model is in mind here, and we can get started with writing the function. All right, just to kind of reset the room here, we are recording and the downloads are available at this link. All right, I don't see any questions, so I'm going to keep diving in here, and we are using this post that I wrote as kind of a basis for what we're doing right now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let's just open up a new worksheet. You'll see the examples are already spelled out here, but we'll go ahead and walk through them together right now. So GroupBy, like I mentioned, is a pretty complex function now. If I go up here to my formula wizard and let's look for GroupBy, okay, I'm going to click OK. And we're not going to use this, but if you've never seen this before, this is a pretty helpful little tool right here. If you've ever wanted to break a function down and just learn more about it and the parameters that it takes, this f of x little button can do that for you. I don't really find it all that helpful, to be honest. So other than to kind of list the arguments that we're taking, and then we're going to dive back into the formula bar. But you'll see that there are quite a few of these, right? There's, I think, 7 in total. 3 of these are mandatory. Okay, and that's what we basically just covered right now. So like I said, you need to pick the category that you want to group by, you need to pick the measure that you want to aggregate by, and then you need to specify how you want to aggregate that measure. Those are the 3, that's the bread and butter of group by. All this other stuff is optional, and this goes into things like if you want to filter something, how you want it sorted by, all sorts of other stuff here. So we're really going to focus mostly on these first 3, and then as the need arises, right, you can look up these on your own. If you have a specific question, I'll try to answer it in real time, but you'll see that, there's just so many possibilities here. Very hard to answer everything on the fly. I'm going to try, time permitting, to show you how to automate something similar to this using Copilot. So anyway, let's focus on the basics right now. Now, what we're going to do is, let's come back to my data sheet here, actually, and I'm going to just start writing equals group by here in the data set. Okay, now this is where we need to think about what our pivot table should look like. Okay, so the first step, like I talked about, is what category do we want to group by? That's what the row fields are called. So just like in the pivot table that we created, those categories go down the rows. Excel's going to assume that we're going to place a category right along the row. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the category column. Okay, I am going to select the entire column here. Now, what you're seeing here is sales all, and I'm going to put this in the chat when I'm done. Sales all category. So we are selecting the category column of this table. Okay, that's going to be the selection that we use as that grouping factor for the categories. Next, what I'm going to do is it's going to ask me for the values, okay? And I'm going to do the same thing here with sales. Now, once you're more comfortable with this, you are more than welcome to write those functions yourself, right? Write these references yourself using this structured reference of Excel tables. But just to kind of lower the bar here, I am using the keyboard shortcuts, selecting, and just select a few rows, Control Shift and down, or I think Control Space would work as well, but I tend to use Control Shift and down to select. So what we're saying here is that we are going to group by category. The values are sales, okay? And then last but not least, it's going to ask us, what is our function, or what do we want to aggregate by? Okay, and all we got to do here is just type in the function as it is spelled in Excel. Okay, so we're going to start with the sum right now. Let's go ahead and do that, and that'll give us the results here. Now, if I change this to like a min, that will change to a min. If I change that to a max, that'll change to a max. This result is a dynamic array function. Let me put this in the chat just so people have this. Okay, and this is the dynamic array. So you should be familiar. Again, a lot of these newer Excel features really build on a lot of other new features in Excel. So for example, GroupBy and PivotBy, these are dynamic array functions. If you've never used this before, if you've never seen something like this, where this output, you almost notice that it kind of lifts off the screen a little bit and works a little differently than you might be familiar with other functions. I would encourage you, and I'm sure I've got a webinar scheduled on dynamic array functions there. Okay, so that is our first GroupBy function. Making sense? Everybody feeling good about what we just did there? Because what we're going to do now is just build on this for a couple more examples and then take it from there. Okay. Thumbs up, thumbs down, just okay. Any? Okay, I see one thumbs up. Always good to get a few, signs of intelligent life out there. Okay, cool. All right. So we'll keep going in that case. I really appreciate the interaction there. Okay. Let's take this one step further. So, like I said, there are a bunch of other arguments here. Okay. So this next one says field headers. Okay. This one is going to specify if we want the field headers in here or not. Okay, so if you'll notice right now, they're not in there, right? So this isn't showing us the category. This isn't showing us what this value is. Okay, could be a little sleeker. Okay, but it could also be hard for our user. Maybe our user doesn't know what this category is, what this value is. Okay, so let's add another argument here. So I'm going to hit a comma. Okay, and then I'm going to hit right here, this is where we get to field headers. So it's going to say yes, but don't show, no, but don't generate, no, but generate, or yes, and show. I want the one that says yes and show. So we do have headers, right? We included the headers in our data. Excel's just not showing them right now. I don't know why. I think this is kind of hard to read. So what we're going to do is just drop a 3 in that last argument there. Okay. And now this is going to show us category and sales. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't tell us that this is like the max of sales. There might be a way to get it, like to make it custom, but I haven't seen a way. If you've seen one, let me know. Well, we'll just leave the as is for now. At least it's telling us something, right? We're able to. I think one way you'll see that we'll be able to get better labels here is once we start adding multiple values, multiple aggregations. Then Excel will actually say this is a max or this is an average. Right now, it's just saying it's sales. It's not telling us how it's aggregated. But once we actually add multiple aggregations, we'll get some more use here. Okay, so again, what I just did there was add another argument. So we're saying this is the maximum. I'm going to go ahead and let's change this back to a sum. Okay. All right. So now this is where things get pretty interesting. So, one of the benefits of pivot tables is often we want to drag and drop multiple fields into one report, right? We want to maybe see total sales and then like average unit price or something like that. And we want to be able to aggregate by multiple things, use different categories, use different measures all at once. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to take this basic logic here, okay, and we're going to use some new dynamic array functions inside this dynamic array function to make that happen. So I told you this gets a little more complicated, okay? We'll see how this works. So what I want to do right now is let's actually write this out. What we're going to do, we're going to try to take sum of sales, okay, and then we also want average of sales. All right, we want a pivot table that gives us both of those things. And we're going to group this by category and product name. Okay, so this is a slightly more complex pivot table. Sometimes I actually find it helpful to like build a pivot table in a pivot table before you try to go and replicate it in group by pivot by. Okay, so what we're going to do now is let's take this basic function. We are going to make this a little more complex this time. Okay, so the starting point again is always going to be those row fields. So what I'm going to do in this case is we're going to choose category and product name. So we're going to select both of these. Okay, now fortunately these are next to each other. If they're not next to each other, there are ways to select non-contiguous columns. Not a problem. We're not going to go over that today. It's a little more than I want to bite off in this session. But what we've just done is select sales. Okay, we're going to select everything between category and product name. That's how to read that. So now we've got multiple categories that we are referencing there. What I'm going to do now, and this is where things get increasingly bizarre, and you're going to maybe think, I don't know about group by and pivot by, maybe a pivot tables is okay. What I want now is I want to be able to aggregate by category and product name, right? I want to get a total sales and I want to get an average of the sales as well. So what I'm going to do here is let's type sales and let's do sales again. So what we're seeing here is, so we have sales, we're selecting category, product name. Okay, we want two aggregations. Okay, so if I just typed in sales here once, we can only aggregate that once. Now we've got two different sales. It's almost like if you remember in a pivot table, you could like drag a value itself twice and like drag the same value over multiple times. That's basically what we're doing here, but with table references. Now what I'm going to do is use the hstack function here. Okay, so what the hstack function does is let us horizontally stack values together. And you'll see why that's important right now, because I'm going to use this as the function. So what you're seeing here is I'm basically taking category, product name. I'm going to get a sum of sales. I'm going to get an average of sales. And this is how that data is going to be grouped by. Okay, so let's get that. So I'm seeing a spill reference here. This is, again, because dynamic arrays work as one. They're basically one cell, one value spilled across many cells. If I've got anything in the way, that is going to block the dynamic array from rendering. But what we're seeing here, and I'll put this in the chat in just a second. Okay, we've got category product names. I've horizontally stacked. Now, what happened if I make this a V stack or vertical stack, right? It's just a pivoted version of itself. Okay, so it just depends. I think usually this is what people want to see, right? They want to see the values across the column. And this is a way that we are able to say, okay, this is a sum of sales and this is an average of sales. All right, so I'm going to put that in the chat. Hopefully everybody's doing okay there. Okay, I'm seeing some questions. Does it have to involve a table? No. How calculation intensive versus building a table with array functions? How does it handle blank dimensions? Those I'm not sure about. So there might be some stuff out there on that, but I've not really had a problem with speed. I mean, usually the data sets I'm working with aren't huge anyway. Blank dimensions, we could try, but I'm assuming you would probably get some kind of an error. I don't think that there's like an error handling function in here. So yeah, as far as error handling, not sure on those either. But anyway, appreciate the questions. Okay, so that is group by in a nutshell. We're going to move into pivot by now. Hopefully this is making sense. What we're going to do with pivot by is just add a couple layers of complexity, because just like with the pivot table, it's not just about adding your categories down the rows. You might want to add categories or dimensions across the columns, and we're going to be able to do both of those with that function. So you'll see that your head's probably already spinning, but there are even more functions or arguments in here that we didn't even talk about. So these are definitely not for the beginner Excel user. Okay, and there's some pretty amazing stuff that people are doing with them, and we're just scratching just scratching the surface. It's so spellbinding, I can hardly get the words out. All right, we're going to move on to pivot by now. We are going to take what we just did and build on that a little bit further. Okay, so I'm going to put this in the chat here, and we'll use this. I think we basically just wrote this function together, but just to give us a good starting point mental model. Again, so we just looked at pivot tables. We started to look at GROUPBY and compared and contrast pivot tables with GROUPBY. Now what I want to have you do is take the PivotBy function and compare contrast to GROUPBY. So that's really how you should think about how your skill set should build off of each of these, right? You'll start with pivot tables, get a mastery of GROUPBY, then you'll move to PivotBy as the most complex of these. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put a function in the chat. We can all go ahead and run this together. I'm in the PivotBy demo file right now. Okay, so this is exactly what we were doing before. We have a sum of sales. Okay, fair enough. What I'm going to do is let's just change this to PivotBy. So all I'm doing is just rewriting this. So instead of GROUPBY, it's PivotBy. Now that in itself isn't going to work, but what we can do now is use this as the basis to write a PivotBy function. If you head over to our f of x here, what you're going to see is that PivotBy is asking for row fields. It's also asking for column fields, okay? So this is where now we have two selections of where should our dimensions go, right? Before it was just, it's assumed to go down the rows. Now Excel's asking, do you want dimensions going down the rows or do you want dimensions going across the columns? So what we need to do here is basically just move everything down a notch here, okay? So we're going to change this to a 3. We're going to change this to a sum, okay? And then the values are going to be sales right here. Okay, whoops, it didn't like that. Got a little freeze out there. Okay, looks like Excel just crashed on me. Let's go back to PivotBy. No, it's still there. Okay. All right, so let's try that again. So what we're going to do is change the field headers to a 3. We're going to change functions to a sum. All right, and I will put this in the chat when I'm done. Okay, and let's click OK. All right, and I will put that in the chat as well. So what we just did was add another argument here, okay? So it looks really similar, right? The only thing that's different now is just this blank, and this is probably maybe a little unfamiliar to you. It looks like my camera's kind of frozen too. Let me restart that. Okay. Anyway, we added a space here, which may be a little unfamiliar to you, but you're going to notice with a lot of these dynamic array functions that is going to be the case where you've got a lot of arguments. You might not necessarily need all of them, okay? So if you don't need one, okay, and there's my camera again, also still frozen, so I might shut that off in a second here. We're adding a space just to accommodate all the arguments. Okay, let me turn off my camera. Okay, someone just said it looked okay for them. Frozen for me, so we'll see how the recording shows up. The joys of online learning. Anyway, couple more examples here. Okay, so let's take something like PivotBy. Okay, so I'm going to take this, and again, don't feel bad to take what you've got and just build on it. What I'll do is right in this blank field, I'm going to go ahead and just add to that. So let's maybe take country here, and we'll drag and drop that. Okay, Control Shift and plus. So what we're saying here is we're going to put category across the rows. We're going to put country across the columns. This is what we're going to aggregate by. We're going to aggregate that by a sum, and that we do want headers. Now, once you get to a certain point where you have so many of these arguments, it might be a good idea to break them up, and I like to use Alt and Enter to do that. So what that's going to do is add carriage returns to your formulas. So now it's just a little bit easier, right? It just feels a little less cluttered when I can see each of these parameters on their own line. Okay. Category, country, sales, and this is starting to feel like we are using code, right, to create a pivot table, right? We've got category along the rows, we've got country across the columns, we've got sales in our values, we've got a sum, and then we've got the 3 to tell us as headers. That one's a little weird, but we've got that. Okay. So now we've got a fully born pivot table here. Okay. And if I change this example, maybe I wanted this to be customer gender, right? I could change that, and that changes. Now it looks like a lot of these are zeros for some reason. Not sure why. Let's change and let's try another. Oh, you know what it is? Because we're trying to sum something that shouldn't be summed. Okay. Let's go back to sales. Okay, and let's change the country to customer gender. Okay. And now, okay, there's what we want. So where things get really interesting is adding like a slicer or adding a drop-down field or something where the user is able to just click on what they want, and this is going to update for them. So that's where things arguably get more powerful and maybe even more user-friendly, is when you start to build those things out so that users don't necessarily even need to drag and drop. I mean, to be honest, that's hard enough for some users, right? Even leaving them to their own devices with a pivot table might not be the best idea. Something like this might add just a little more control for you as a developer, and the end user as well, to come in here, use some drop downs or slicers, and get this pivot table displayed. All right. I'm going to paste this one in just for the sake of time because I do want to show you an alternative, which I think is pretty exciting, using Copilot. So let me put this one in the formula bar here, and then I'm going to put this in the chat. Okay. And okay, that one, the font was really big for some reason, but it's there. Okay. You are going to see here, we've created a pivot table and we're building off a lot of the same ideas, right? Okay, my camera looks better now. Anyway, so we are going to show country and customer gender, right, along the rows. We're going to show category across the columns. We're going to aggregate by quantity and sales. We're going to get an average of quantity, a sum of sales. We're going to add the headers. So a lot of stuff that we can do here. And I even have an example in the blog post. And let me move this over for you because I know that formatting pivot tables can be kind of a pain. Okay, so what's really interesting here is because everything here is built by formulas. What we can do here is use conditional formatting. So if I always want, for example, my sales to be currency formatted versus my quantities to be decimal formatted, I can say something like, every time a column is highlighted or named, I should say sales, right? Format this one way versus another. So you can even start to combine this with other features like we talked about, maybe data validation for your input, or even on the output side with formatting, start using things like conditional formatting. That's going to allow you to just make that consistently formatted no matter how far out this formula expands or where it's placed in the worksheet or anything like that, right? You have this consistent conditional formatting set up. Okay, so a lot more you can do here. And again, in this example, if you wanted to create a proportion table, the percent of function, that's a newer one as well in Excel. I'll place this in the chat in a second here. But even if you wanted to know, what are the percents that roll up to the total in terms of sales, right, by country and category. So if you want to display this as a percentage, you could do that. With some of the tricks we covered here, you could even maybe show the raw figures and also the percentages. Both of them give different context depending on what you're trying to do, right? Percentages are good for relative comparisons often, but sometimes people do want that raw feel as well to understand the whole relative absolute magnitude of something, or I should say the absolute magnitude. You could do them both. Okay, so I'm going to put this one in the chat here. And a couple more things we're going to do. Okay. So last but not least, what I want to show you is maybe a way to avoid learning this altogether. All right. For those of you who are bold enough, Copilot, I found doesn't work well to try to get help with GroupBy and PivotBy. So I'm going to launch Copilot right now. Okay. This is a little epilogue bonus feature here. Okay. Because as you saw, these functions are pretty intense. There's a lot you can do with them. And what I want to try to do is, let me try to save this to my OneDrive. Okay. There we go. Okay. Well, I don't want that to be a binary file. All right. Let's see if that works. Okay. Okay. So this is just total bonus. If you have Copilot handy, if you want to upload your file, that's great. I just want to show you an alternative to doing this that might be a little easier for you. Okay. So we'll give Copilot a second here to get started. If there are any questions, please don't hesitate. Appreciate everybody's patience with a couple near technical glitches there. I think we held it together pretty good for the most part. And of course, Copilot's not cooperating right now. Let me close this and open it again. Okay. And there we go. Go to PivotBy. Okay. Okay, there we go. And then we'll want, yep, upload this to OneDrive. Okay. So if this is interesting to you, but you maybe don't want to invest so much time in learning all the functions, let's see how Copilot can help us. I'm going to give you a little workaround. So if I ask for something like, create a group by function, placing a category along the rows, and total sales in the values. Okay, let's see how that works. I've not had great experience with this, so we'll see. Okay, so yeah, it gives us those values, but not using group by. Okay, so if I wanted to, okay, it's telling us some ifs, right? It seems very confused. So that's not really what I want. I guess we could set this up manually, but it's not. Some of this is a different can of wax, right? So this is pretty unsatisfactory. I'll add this. I get a pivot table. Not what we wanted for the reasons we talked about. Let's go back here. Now what I'm going to do is let's take this prompt. Okay. Use Python to create a pivot table. Okay. To pivot table placing category. So Copilot and Python work really well together. It can do a lot more stuff than I think Excel can do on its own with Copilot. Let's start the advanced analysis. Okay. This is going to be Python code. This is not GroupBy. This is not PivotBy. These are Python, specifically usually pandas functions here. But this is exactly what we wanted, right? There's the code. We have this in formulas. Okay. So if you're comfortable with Python and Excel, and this might be an easier way for you to build things like this, maybe we even want something like create a pivot table with, let's see, category. Let's see, country along the rows, category along the columns. Give me sum of sales and average. I'm trying to remember what was in this data set. Average unit price. Okay, unit price and the values. And let's see how this works. Probably a lot better than Copilot's going to do, trying to give you group by pivot by functions. Okay, yeah, and that just went down pretty easily. Okay, so just an alternative, okay, if you want to experiment I think there's a lot of exciting stuff that can be done here, but I know it is Python. Not everybody's comfortable with it. It is Copilot. Not everybody has that, but just wanted to throw that out there. All right. Okay. Any questions about any of this before we adjourn here? Thanks everybody again for attending today. Really appreciate it. You may have noticed that I don't sell anything at these. I don't ask you to join my leadership academy or do anything. All I would ask is if you could leave some feedback, that would be much appreciated. So I'm going to share this right now in the chat. If you could take a couple of minutes to do that, if you've got some time now or later today, that would be much appreciated. This just gives you good data of what's working well, what you'd like to see more of. And again, I try to make this as win-win as possible so that you're getting good training in exchange for data, practice, exposure, advertising, and so forth for me. Last but not least is future events. Okay. I've got a bunch more of these coming up on a variety of topics related to Excel and Python and AI, et cetera, et cetera. So you can take a look at those, and you are welcome to um, explore those. Can you email instructions for Copilot? This is all being recorded, so you can take a look at that and those prompts. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. And again, this will be emailed out. So if there's something that you want to see again that you missed, you can refer to the recording for that. It's going to be emailed to you. So check your email. It's going to be a YouTube link that goes out. Okay, recording is stopped.